Hello. Hello, hello. It is me, the Indigo Knight. Today we're going to be doing something a little more freeform, a little more off the cuff, as they say, unscripted. And I'm going to be talking about our situation right now because a lot of people are fairly naive when it comes to the subject of just how bad things will be. So, humans are exceptionally gullible. I would say most people have evolved to not really think too much of themselves, not really think critically. They just sort of go with the flow and let other people do all the decision making. And that's just how we evolved as humans and tribes. But when before I had my spiritual blowout, before I accidentally activated my Kundalini and turned on my third eye in my car on lunch break in the Marine Corps, I was pretty apathetic to most things, pretty nihilistic. I really didn't care what was happening or why it was happening. And suddenly, over the course of about a year, it just completely and utterly flipped on its head. I went from being a militant and atheistic nihilist to a very spiritual person with a sudden realization that everything has meaning and there is purpose. And I was filled with a very sort of potent sense. That was the most powerful feeling that I had while this was all happening. But it came on so strong. And I went so fast into it that I literally went crazy during this time. There was some intense psychosis that was happening, but I guess it just kind of goes in hand. I literally went mad for a little while, but it activated something in me. It woke me up, and I thought I was going crazy there for a beginning, but then I would start to meet other people who were going through the same thing. And the strongest feeling that I had during that time was a sense of purpose to do something about it. And so there began my journey for what is now. I never would have predicted ever in my life that something like this would have happened. But here I am. And it really, there was two major events that sparked this whole thing off. The first one was while I was still in the Marine Corps, I watched, I think it was 4-hour long documentaries that broke down in painfully excruciating detail on all of the things that happened to prove that 9/11 was an orchestrated inside job. The amount of evidence was absolutely and utterly staggering. And I believe if anybody were to watch it, other than just exhibiting psychosis, it was just that obvious. And so something snapped in my head at that moment where I was like, holy shit, if they are willing to do this and they are capable of doing this and just lying to everyone's faces and getting away with it, then there is no end. There is no ceiling to what they have done, are doing, and will have plans to do in the future. It is man-made horrors beyond comprehension level of awfulness. And that is, it floored me. It completely fucked me up. And it's really stressful because and I was active duty in the Marine Corps at the time. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, what is going on? But you try and tell anybody that, and there's just this glazed over sort of expression, or they don't really understand what that means. Like, they get it, they see it. Yeah, it's an inside job, but they don't really have like the capacity to understand what that really means. And then the other thing happened a few years later where I was watching this documentary series put on by the Thunderbolts Project on YouTube And it was essentially based off of the works of Immanuel Velikovsky, and suggested and hinted at through qualitative evidence of ancient myths all around the world that our solar system and the nature, essentially the nature of our reality, the physics behind it, aren't what people say it is. Like the electric universe theory suggests that gravity is a much weaker force than electromagnetism is. And I'm not a scientist by any means, but tell it to anybody else and they'll sure fucking pretend that they are. But what it did was it made more sense to me than the standard gravitational model that we are all taught growing up. Because the reason why was they would produce a lot of their claims with laboratory experimentation. And they suggested that if your theory isn't really provable in a lab with practical experimentation, then what is it? It's just an idea almost. Anyway, I'm not a scientist. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because it really made you think. It was like, holy shit, maybe they are all wrong to a certain degree. And maybe the shit that we're being fed is not correct. What if our whole idea of how this shit works is just wrong? And I'm not going to pretend I know how it all works. The electric universe theory is fascinating because they do come out with some very interesting ideas and back a lot of it up with, like I said, experimentation. But those two events shook me. I felt betrayed in a way. I was like, holy shit. And then coupled with my spiritual blowout where I saw and experienced things that were shit that you only would really hear about in movies. And it was just the perfect storm for fucking who I am today, I guess. It took me a while. Like after my spiritual blowout, my Kundalini experience, like I was cooked. I'm lucky I didn't die. Not gonna lie. I'm not even being dramatic. That's literally like my whole Marine Corps career came crumbling down around me. I lost my house. I got a divorce. It was almost game over for me. I was quite literally unfit to really do anything except maybe crawl out of bed because I was gripped by like a constant daily panic. It's just a constant underlying just sense of panic at any given moment. And it sometimes would explode out of control. I wasn't eating anything. It was awful. It took me like 5 years to really kind of recover out of that. And that was when I started my first channel, The Indigo Knight, where I started talking about some metaphysical stuff, some concepts that I had picked up and learned along the way, mostly just warnings. And there still is some practical advice out there for people who are going through what I went through, but it really wasn't resonating with me. It wasn't really, it felt off. I felt like there's a million other people that could explain what this shit is just better than I could. And so I started to, because I found some success on there. I had like 3,000 subscribers, and that was primarily off of like 2 videos. One video was me talking about my Kundalini and third eye experience. And then the other one was my mandala energy reading about Trump. And then it just sort of tapered off from there. It just, I don't know. I was not into it in that capacity anymore. And eventually I just completely petered off into me just doing a mandala video. And I got people to pay me to do some of those mandala videos, like the ones on Canada and things like that. Like I had patrons that were paying for me to do these. And if you're watching this, I can't find your email, but you paid for a personal mandala reading, Mr. Person or Mrs. Person, and you never replied to me after I told you it was done. So it's still there. I didn't give it to you. So if you want it, just hit me up. But I I stopped it there. I just stopped it. I was like, this is not working. This is not something. Is like it was. I was finally grounding myself back down into reality. It took me like 10 years to fully reground myself to what I am today. Just to kind of give you an emphasis of like how severe these types of things can be. I am extremely lucky, and I have no doubt that this was all planned before I came into life, because of the way it worked out. I ended up moving back in with my parents after my divorce, after I moved back from San Diego, and my dad has Parkinson's, so I realized it was inevitable that I would have to come back home to take care of him. So I just stayed up here. And then once my dad's Parkinson's had developed to the point where he needed full-time care, that's what I started to do, which is what I do full-time now. And I've been doing this for 7 years now. It's been pretty long, but I've decided to get back into this, but more as I don't even know. Like I still want to teach people about metaphysics and the nature of our reality, but there is a bigger calling, which is the dire situation that we as humanity find ourselves in. And if there's one thing that the electric universe theory has really sort of shone a light on for me, is that there have been series of upheavals and catastrophes that have wiped chunks of the population out on the planet, and those can happen again. I don't believe that we live in this very sort of stable million-year orbit type of deal around the sun. It's almost like we're just tricking ourselves into believing that because it's easier and less stressful. This is a crisis of whether or not we're going to survive for the next millennium. But there's so many fucking people on this planet right now. And the population is just getting bigger and bigger in some places and smaller in other places. And we are technologically very advanced, but we are spiritually becoming more and more retarded. And we have reached like an apex level of retardation as far as our spirituality is concerned. It's back in the day, back in medieval times and beyond, when people were in a more natural state, when we were in a more primitive natural state to what we evolved in. We all looked down upon and oftentimes absolutely despised a couple of different types of people. One of those types of people were prostitutes because, well, I'll get to that here in a second. Another group was actors, and then another group was merchants, because they all would do or say anything for money. Now, merchants, they could get wealthy, but they still were not liked by very many people, or no one. And so now our whole civilization is being controlled by merchants, people whose sole purpose in life is to make money. Nothing else matters because they are incapable of being anything else or doing anything else. And it is severely, severely fucked up. Because back in the day, especially like in Western society, there were caste systems. They were sort of loosely based. Like they didn't call them caste systems. There was like the nobility and the upper nobility and the peasants or the serfs or whatever, depending on where you're at. But there was still a somewhat malleable sense of mobility, upward mobility. And there was they recognized that if somebody was truly exceptional, that there was a place for them either in the church or as a military commander or as a knight. You could move up the ladder in a sense. Maybe not all the way up in one lifetime, but your family could. you could do a great deed on the battlefield and be knighted. After you were knighted, you could serve and be granted fiefs. There's just a mobility to it. And so that if you were a peasant born in a village, but you were super smart, there was a chance that you could be recognized for that and be given a better opportunity in your society. But today, it's not. You have all of these people that are really fucking smart that go through the school system and are considered to be stupid because so I'm not saying this to toot my own horn here. I'm not saying this to boost my fucking ego, but it's my own personal experience with this. So I was tested as a kid for my IQ and ADD and stuff, and they determined that I had ADD, and my IQ was 129, and the psychologist told my mom that I was either going to do exceptionally well in school or exceptionally awful in school. And I was the latter. I thought school was the stupidest shit ever. It was just a fucking waste of time. I was getting low grades because I refused to do homework. Out of principle, I just said, no, I'm not doing this at home. My home is my me time. And so they're like, all right. And I was branded having a written language disability. As a result, somehow in the mix, I was associated with having some sort of disability. But me, because I had just surrendered to the idea that this school system was just stupid. And so I was like, well, this is just an easy way for me to coast through this school system. And there were multiple teachers that had come up to me in these special education classes, and then they were just like, why are you here? Like I would be given reading tests, and I would score like in the college level reading, and they were just perplexed. And I was like, well, I don't know. They just put me here, and I made a lot of friends that were in those classes. But like it was just befuddling to them. I was put in like special education, like math classes, because they wanted me to show the work I did in my math. But I was just doing it all in my head. But even though I got all the answers right, they still marked them all wrong. So I said, well, fuck this. And I just refused to do my work anymore. So I had a pretty rough time going through school, but it wasn't because I was stupid. It was because the school system was stupid. And I'm saying that because there are truly exceptional people, really smart people out there who are just being shafted. And what they're doing is they're selecting for this merchant class that is usually born into it. But they all go to the same clubs, they all go to the same schools. It's just this, and they don't give a shit about anything. And I've experienced, and many of you have probably experienced this corporate class too. I remember the last example was I was at, the last example, it was just the most potent example. I was with my ex-wife at this solar company that she worked for. She was a canvasser, so she walked around and sold people solar, essentially. And there was this big corporate like celebration at the end of the year, and there was all the canvassers at one table. There was all the Mexicans who did all the installation work at one table, and then the other two tables were these corporate vipers. And they were just these nasty, shitty, terrible fucking people that you could tell that they were just different in a sense where they just seemed and acted like they were better than you in every single way. I remember in that party, one of the Mexican guys, he won a ticket to the San Diego Chargers. And then immediately this corporate guy walks over and just says, hey, give me that or I'll fire you. And we were like, oh, what the fuck? Like, holy shit. We left right after that. But it was just just an eye-opening experience. And then I've worked retail before, and the profundity of like how simple a lot of these corporate people can be. They're not really that smart at all. they have just been told their whole fucking lives that they're like the best thing ever. So they have this huge overconfidence. And there's a lot of these people that are, they've wormed their way into all sorts of different aspects of society. And what I mean by that is, like, I know people who been in corporate America their whole life, and then they take some acid and, you know, suddenly realize there's something more to all of this. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. But then they just continue to do what they've always done before and sort of corporatize the spiritual process, which is something, and the reason why I was actually even kind of reluctant to jump back into this in the first place. I'm not opposed to making money. There's nothing wrong with making money. But I remember when I was going through all of these seminars in San Diego that my ex-wife was going to me with. She was the one kind of getting me involved in them. And it was all of these Jewish guys that were selling this idea of like conscious entrepreneurship, which, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But I remember the first day I went to this class was the first day I had gotten out of the Marine Corps. It was just like boom, boom. Like I was officially done with the Marines, and I was, boom, sitting in a seat that afternoon, getting a class from this guy. And the first thing he does, he goes, can I get a volunteer? And so I went, sure. And I just hopped up on the stage and I was just like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to jump right into this. And so he didn't even really bother to ask me what it was that I was trying to do. And I quickly realized that they didn't actually care, and the entire process, it didn't really matter. The whole mentality around it and the fundamentally most important aspect of all of it was to make money. And it wasn't to enhance what you can do to actually help people more profoundly, more impactfully. It was, how do you convince people that whatever you're doing, no matter what it is worth X amount of dollars, like $3,000, $4,000. And a lot of these people are essentially taking advantage of desperate people. Because I don't know if you realize this, but a lot of people, when they get upset or really stressed out, they tend to be desperate. They got a lot of anxiety and they like to reach out. When I was doing tarot card readings full time, that was like half of the people I dealt with. Somebody like in this panic state, just desperately searching for information. And they were willing to do and pay you whatever it was just for somebody to come rescue them. And I had the integrity to tell most of them that they needed to calm down and that there's nothing that I can really do or say. I was like, my advice to you is to try and calm yourself down and get through this situation. But there is nothing magical that I can say. I can pull 1,000,000 tarot cards and try and spell the best picture for you for the future. But none of that matters because you're in this anxious state. And I quickly realized that a lot of the people that are interested in getting tarot card readings are actually severely mentally ill. Like really in a bad way, mentally speaking. And people, most tarot card readers will just fucking take their money and tell them what they want to hear. And it black-pilled me on the whole industry. I would meet people who would just sit there online and spit out random sort of spiritual metaphysical content on the internet just randomly after they've, had some sort of spiritual experience. And then when they find the one that sticks, or they find the group of people that just seem to be the most desperate and are underexploited, and then they just exploit that demographic. There's no like love in it. There's no fucking I don't know. It just irks me to the maximum. And so that's one of the real reasons why I stopped doing tarot card readings. The other one was that I found myself fairly successful at my mandala readings, for those of you who have been following me. And it was a blessing to have some of these people cover me and share with me to their audiences for their whatever fucking spiritual practice they were selling. And I got invited to these events, and these events were filled with really affluent people, really rich people. Now, these events were sort of just a really expensive, egotistical stroking circle jerk. It was just people paying to come together in a circle with other people at this event over a couple days just to fucking talk about themselves. Like, oh, I just bought this $1 million house. It was a huge fucking waste of time. And I realized that because I had gotten my foot through the door, and I thought to myself, I could make a living for the rest of my life, basically giving fellatio to the egos of these rich fucking people. I had been inside mansions, multi-million-dollar mansions, and I left. I just fucking walked out. I just stopped what I was doing. That was another part of the reason why I stopped doing my YouTube channel. I just needed like a reset, just to kind of like fucking figure shit out, what I want to do. And I went from making a really comfortable amount of money doing this, giving readings to people all over the world, to not. I just stopped. And the more I look into the spiritual sort of movement, the more I don't like what I see. I call it the cult of positivity. And there's nothing wrong with positivity, but there is such a thing as toxic levels of positivity. And there is a need to recognize the darkness as well as the light, because if you stare into the light too long, you will go blind. And you have to dive into the abyss every once in a while to get clarity and perspective on what's going on in the world. And so my intention with restarting this channel, I'm not trying to talk about myself too much here, is I want to offer that perspective. I want to offer the perspective of metaphysics and spirituality from somebody who you would never guess could ever come up with that. I couldn't even tell you. There's a lot more of us than you think. It's just that a lot of those people, I don't know if they have the chops to talk about it as long as I can, because I love to talk. I am the first to admit that I have a huge ego, but it has been humbled so much that I don't know if that matters at all. But my point with this video is that there's a lot of shit going on out there, a lot of things that are really fucked up. One of the things, let's just look at Elon Musk, for example, and look at Twitter or X or whatever the fuck it's called. A lot of people look at Elon Musk, and I will admit that myself included at the time wasn't sure about him. I was skeptical. I wasn't quite able to put my finger on what it was, but it's all come to light now. There is nothing that happens in the big mainstream in this world anymore that isn't by design. There is a monolithic corporate banking entity that runs everything. These corporations, they own each other. They are just essentially one thing. They all run each other. And Elon Musk buying Twitter was a very calculated measure at a very important time, because what was happening was they had effectively removed most of right-wing conservative opposition, basically normal people off of the internet, at least off of the mainstream places like Twitter, where a lot of discussions were happening. And what was happening was they were slipping into the dark recesses of the internet. They were evading a lot of monitoring because they had no other choice but to sort of slip into these dark places. And they can't really monitor and control that when that's happening. So what they needed and what they did was they used Elon to buy Twitter and to use Elon as a sort of like, hey guys, look at me, I'm just like you, and go America and freedom of speech and all that shit. And it's all a lie. And he's proven it a couple times, and it might not sound like much, but there are a couple of examples of him lying. One of them is he pretended to, there's these two video games, Path of Exile 2 and Diablo 4. And he supposedly was one of like the top 10 ranked Diablo 4 players in the world. And he does live streams with that and Path of Exile 2. They're basically like, they're really similar games. And for those of you who don't know, they're pretty popular. And it is pretty clear, it's pretty obvious that he did not do that. He must have, he either bought the account or he paid somebody to do that for him on his account. But he definitely didn't do that, but he says he did, and he did so in a way to try and appeal to a certain demographic, because there's a lot of men out there who play video games. And so he's lying to you right there. He's lying to you. He's saying, look at me, I'm doing this, like me. And then the other thing that happened, really big one, was the H-1B visas, when people started saying, hey, no, we don't want to be replaced by foreign cheap slave labor, essentially. And then he just immediately started axing all of these major accounts and then said, I will, fight tooth and nail to like prevent this type of speech from happening. And so he lied about free speech. He basically just admitted that the speech is only acceptable up until when I deem it acceptable, which is not free speech. So Twitter is a big fucking scam. It's basically a way to get everybody onto a platform with these propped up accounts that they use, that the people that are in control use to kind of keep a handle on the opposition, or keep a handle on the other half of the population. And so people like Alex Jones are a good example of like a controlled opposition. Somebody who is made to be this like big, bright example of the good guy, the thing that the right wingers and the conservatives can get behind. He's all about God. And he's always, he actually does make some pretty interesting predictions about a lot of stuff. And he's always constantly, he's a showman first, and he's a supplement salesman second, and then he's a truther third or whatever. But that's his job. His job is he's a black propagandist, basically. Go look up what black propagandist means. But his job is to get everybody that would normally be skeptical, normally be questioning things against the government and what's going on, and harness that energy and collect them and get them to focus on things that aren't really destructive to what their machinations are. It's just to get them, harness them, and control them, and redirect them in ways that don't actually damage what the people are in control are doing. And as a result, we get what we get. He is constantly making outrageous claims about World War III and doomsday shit all the fucking time. And he's always saying that the globalists are coming down, the globalists this, the globalists that. But nothing ever happens. It's like, that's the point. It's just this constant, it's like they want you to focus on the struggle, on the fight, as opposed to actually doing anything about it, which I realize the irony of what I'm about to say, but the internet has become the great pacifier of people, because it gives them a false sense of satisfaction of doing something when they complain and share information online. And it's not that sharing an information and complaining about stuff online is bad, but it gives people enough. It gives people enough sense of I'm doing something to prevent anything from actually happening. Like nobody is doing anything to stop any of the stuff that's happening. And that the one time somebody assassinates a CEO of some major corporation and people on TikTok start realizing that, oh, we, us normal people, we shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be fighting these evil corporate overlords. You know, then they want to get rid of fucking Twitter ASAP because stuff like that can slip through the cracks on Twitter by its design. They want to make it more like YouTube Shorts, where it's more just about stupid, you know, video game clips or movie clips and shit. So I just wanted to get a lot of this off my chest. And there are certain things that I want to talk about. There's a specific group of people specifically that is really behind and controlling and pulling a lot of these strings. But I can't actually talk about them because the algorithm is set up in a way, and I've tested this out, like this, if I mention them, if I bring them up, then my videos are, you wouldn't see these videos. It happens on my TikTok all the time. And we will very carefully in time dissect these people and what is going on. But I have to be clever with it. It's not that I'm afraid to identify who they are, but it should be telling to you that one would have to be this careful about talking about certain people, because those people are usually the ones that don't want to be talked about, obviously. So I will break it down in ways that I can once I sort of figure out what the best way to do it is. But I can tell you one thing, that there will be no place to go for these fucking people once the critical mass of people wake up to who they are. It's not going to be good for them, and they know it, and that's why they're spending so much time preventing people like me from sharing this information. But like I say, we'll get to that as time comes, and if you know type of deal. But that's all I'll say on that. But okay, so yes, there is going to be a lot of heaviness in what I want to talk about, but I'm going to be giving some tips out on how you can enrich your life, because that's what really spirituality is all about. How can you enrich your life? How can you ease its transition, your transition through life, and how you can change your perspective about certain things that really makes all the difference. One of the things that I want to be talking about, and I think it's going to be the next video that I talk about, where I talk about how and what our emotions really are and how they interact with, are created by, and can get stuck within the bodies and the energetic systems of the body, including your aura, your electromagnetic field, which we all have. Well, some people have, some people are like, I don't know what you would call them. They're like shapeshifters. There's certain people out there that wear the skin of a human, but have no humanity in them at all. And there's other things I want to talk about as well, but a lot of it is going to be just educating you on what's actually happening in the world, how deep that shit goes, whilst carefully navigating an algorithm designed to prevent people from actually talking about this type of shit. But that's actually all I got for this, because my voice is going hoarse. I actually recorded another 40-minute little talking spree right before this, but I said a lot of things that will probably get me axed off the algorithm. And so I've decided to re-record a little bit more language friendly, or family friendly, as they say, because I suppose that helps boost you in the algorithm when you make sure that it's family friendly or whatever. But yeah, that's all I got. Let me know what you think down below. Check out all my other videos. I got some other readings, shit like that. I got a mandala for 2025 that I might relook at. I want a live stream, but I don't have enough followers yet. So that'll come in time. But until next time, I hope you have a wonderful time of day.